Hey everyone, I wanted to take a couple of minutes today to record a video about how to keep track of data in forms in React. And this is an issue that I see with a lot of my beginner students. And I just want to go through some of the best practices to efficiently keep track of the data that we need to have in a form. You can see over here on the left-hand portion of the screen, I have just a basic React component that's just displaying a form, and you can see what that looks like over here in the browser. We only have one input, which is for the first name, and you can see that we're keeping track of what the value of the first name is using React's useState, which is initially set equal to an empty string. And down here in line 13, you can see that the value of that input element is going to be first name. If this is your first time doing this, you might be surprised that when you go over into the browser and you start typing, I'm typing, nothing's happening. And the reason for that is because of React's default model is one-way binding, which is to say that the model, or in this case, the state, dictates what the value of the input field is going to be. But the mere fact that the user tried to type something doesn't automatically change the model. So we have to do that manually to get our desired outcome. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a value, an attribute to the input field here called onChange. And here you can do this inline, but I'm actually going to create a separate function to handle this change, and I'm going to call it handle first name change. Okay. Now we need to create that function. So we'll go up here into above the return statement in our function and create a constant called handle first name change. Now this function automatically gets an event parameter. And for now, what I'm just going to do is console log the event.target.value. Okay, there's a lot of different properties on the event object. We'll look at least one more of them in a second here, but for now what we're interested in is event.target.value. Now if I go over here, refresh, and start typing, you can see that the letters that I'm typing are being console logged. So basically what the user typed is saved in this at this location called event.target.value. But of course we don't want to just console log that. What we actually want to do is update the value of first name. So we're going to go in here and do set first name, and we're going to pass that an argument of event.target.value. So whatever the user typed should that should be the new value of first name. Let's see if this works. Yep, and now you can see I'm typing in here. I can erase, and everything's working perfectly. All right. Now we probably don't want to have a form where we're just asking for the user's first name. We're probably going to want to ask them for more things. So let's add another input field. We'll make it maybe for the last name. And I'm going to do this the way that I see my beginner intermediate students do this. All right, so I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to copy what we have for first name, paste it down here, and then go in and change things appropriately. So it's for the last name, make the label last name. Value is going to be last name. We're going to have to create this in a second, and that state, and then we're going to make this handle last name change, and then let's see, ID is going to be last name. All right. Now, what most students will do, is they'll go in here and they'll copy this use state, pull it down here, and instead of first name, this is going to be last name. Instead of set first name, it's going to be set last name. And then we're going to create a new handle function called const handle last name change. It gets an event, and instead of calling set first name, we're going to call set last name, event.target.value. All right, and let's see if that works. Oops, caps lock. Yep, it's working. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, particularly if you have two inputs. But as you can probably see, some forms can have dozens of different inputs. We probably don't want a dozen different use states and a dozen different handlers. So let's just say, let's say for the sake of argument that we wanted to put a third field in here. Okay, so we'll call this. What's a good one here? We could do email would make sense, but that's a different input type. So we'll just say location. Okay, so they're going to put the name of the city that they live in. Right now, we could go in here and say value, make a third use state and say value equals location on change equals handle location change, but we do not want to do that. All right, so because obviously repeating ourselves twice is fine. Repeating yourself 3 or more times is getting into territory where you probably want to look for a different solution. So what we're going to do here actually is not create a third use state, and instead we're going to combine all of the information about our different inputs into one object. So we're going to say const, let's just call it, I think we can just call it, let's call it form info, and then set form info. And this will be, we're going to do use state here, and it's going to be an object that has those values for all of the different inputs that we want. So there's going to be one for first name, which is going to be an empty string, last name, also an empty string, and location, which is also going to be an empty string. Now for these values, we don't have floating constants called first name anymore. We have an object called form info dot first name, form info dot last name, and then down here we'll call this form info dot location. All right. Now, I would also like to avoid making a third handle, a third handler function. So in other words, well, first of all, lines 9 and 12 don't work anymore. But yeah, we don't want to have 3 or more handlers. So we would like to have one handler. So I'm just going to have a function called handle change. And this is going to get an event. And this handle change function is going to handle the change for all of the inputs. All right, so let's go in here, and we're going to change this on change handler to handle change. Now, the question that you can probably foresee is, how is this one function going to handle all of these changes? Because there are changes to 3 different inputs. And the handle change function somehow has to be aware of why it was called. Was it called because the on change in the first name input triggered, or the last name, or the location? And so right now, what I'll just do here now is I'm just going to console log event.target.value again. And again, if I go in here and start typing, you can see the letters that I'm typing are showing up. But again, the problem is just what I said. We don't really know, or at least the handle change function doesn't know, where these letters were typed from, and we need to change that. And the way that we're going to change that is by adding a new attribute to each of these input fields, which is going to be the name attribute. And that name attribute is going to identify where the change came from, and specifically it's going to be set equal to the property value in this state object, the form info state object. So for this first info, I'm going to give this a name of first name. All right, and then down here, this is going to be a name of last name, and then down here we'll give this a name property of location. Right, and now I'll just go in here and we'll console log something else off of the event target object, which is going to be event.target.name. And let's see what happens here. I'll clear this. And as I type something, you can see now that this handle change function is aware of what called it. And that's going to be very helpful. Now, the last step is to actually update the form info. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use something pretty cool in, this is standard JavaScript. This doesn't have anything to do with React specifically, but we're going to use what's called spread syntax. So we're going to call the setter function, set form info, and we're going to type ... form info. Now what this does is it takes a copy of what form info, the form info object is right now, and then it allows us to sort of start with that as a starting point, but then to update the values of various properties arbitrarily. In this case, we're only going to update one property at a time. And I'll show you how to do this. You want to write a comma here, and then because this property is going to be dynamic, it could be coming from first name, it could be coming from last name, it could be coming from location. We're going to use brackets and the name of the property that we want to change, which is on event.target.name, and the value of that updated property is going to be event.target.value. All right, and if I save that and come back over here, what you'll see now is as I start typing, you can see that it's all working, right? And it's all being handled in this one object called form info and this one handler called handle change. And this obviously allows you to then add an arbitrarily large number of input fields in your form without having to add new instances of use state or new handlers. All you have to do is add a property to the initial state object and then make sure that you include that as a name property in the actual input field.